Hello, today we're going to be learning about the process of photosynthesis. So you may be wondering, what is photosynthesis? This is the process of converting solar energy into chemical energy. Now, plants perform photosynthesis in order to create energy for themselves. And in turn, oxygen is created, which is what we as humans and animals breathe in. So it's important for the plant, but it's also important for us. Now we're going to go over the equation of photosynthesis. And at first it may look a little confusing, but we're going to go over each component separately so you understand each one. And I just want to note that these numbers in front are just used to balance the equation, and they're not necessarily important to what we're talking about today, so I've written them there for reference, but we'll just kind of ignore them and talk about the compounds themselves. The first compound is CO2, which is carbon dioxide. This is what humans and animals exhale. The next one is H2O, which is water. And on the right side of the arrow, we have C6H12O6, which is glucose. This is a sugar. And next we have O2, which is oxygen, which is what we as humans and animals also breathe in. So these two on the left side of the arrow are called the reactants, and these two on the right side of the arrow are called the products. Now the arrow here in the middle represents when the reaction is taking place. And I've written light above the arrow because without light, the reaction, that is photosynthesis, can't take place. So an example that might help you to understand this a little bit better would be to think of baking a cake. You have these two reactants, which you can think of are the ingredients in the cake. So you mix the ingredients together, and you can think of the arrow as the oven. So you mix them together, and this is where the reaction takes place, or the cake is being baked. And when you take the cake out of the oven, it looks completely different than what you had before. And so the reaction has taken place. So that's just can get you thinking about what photosynthesis is. And now we're going to look at what photosynthesis is on the diagram of the plant here. So the first place we'll look is down here at the bottom. So one of our ingredients or reactants is water. So water is intaken through the roots of the plant, and it's going to be carried up the roots, up the stem, using the xylem in the plant, which is a fancy term for what carries the electron molecules in the water up the plant. And next we've got CO2. So it may look like this arrow is pointing to nothing, but it's just talking about the CO2, which is one of our reactants that enters into the plant during photosynthesis. And CO2 is in the air all around us. And lastly, we have the light source, which is where the reaction is able to take place. So in this case, the light source is the sun. This is the case for most plants that are outside. Sometimes you'll use an artificial light source. Now you may be wondering, where does photosynthesis take place on the plant? So more specifically, it takes place in the leaves in the chloroplast. Now the chloroplasts are what contain the chlorophyll. And thinking back to our example of the cake, you can think of them as the kitchen. They're the food source, or where the food source is created. They're where the process takes place. So when all three of these are mixed together, they come into the chloroplast. We're left with our two products. So our first product is C6H12O6. This is the glucose, and it's what gives the plant its energy source. So you can think about how we as humans need energy to perform our daily tasks and functions. This plant also needs glucose, or the sugar, to create energy for it to keep performing its daily functions as well. The plant also creates oxygen, and it's a common misconception that the plant releases all of its oxygen for us as humans and animals to breathe in. But that's not the case. The plant contains some of its oxygen, keeps it for later use, but it does release a lot of it out into the atmosphere for humans and animals to breathe in. Now, just a side note, our two products, glucose and oxygen, the plant is going to keep some of them in order to perform cellular respiration. Now, we're not going to go into what cellular respiration is today, but just a side note to think about, that the plant does need to keep some glucose and oxygen in order to perform cellular respiration. So there are a few factors that impact how the plant can perform photosynthesis. One would be the light intensity. So in an area where there's a lot of light or a lot of sunlight, the plant would be able to perform photosynthesis faster. In an area with no sunlight, or for example at night, the plant is unable to perform photosynthesis. Another factor would be the amount of the reactants. So if the plant was in an area with very little CO2 or very little water, it would have trouble performing photosynthesis as quickly because it doesn't have the necessary reactants or ingredients. So one last time, we'll just go over what photosynthesis is, just to recap. The purpose of photosynthesis is to create food for the plant, and in turn, it creates oxygen for humans. And it's important because without plants, we can think of them as the producers. If we didn't have the producers in the food chain, primary and secondary and tertiary consumers would have nothing to eat. So these plants, the autotrophs, are the producers, and they produce food for themselves through photosynthesis. And we've got CO2 and H2O as the reactants. The reaction takes place in the presence of light. We have glucose and oxygen as the products, and that is the process of photosynthesis. So I hope that you've learned a little bit today about photosynthesis.